The Supreme Court has just handed the Trump administration a major win on an immigration policy tied closely to Colorado. Court ruled this afternoon that the administration can resume its fast-track deportations of people it claims are members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, which the Trump administration says is run out of Colorado. By a 5-4 vote, the court has lifted a judge's nationwide orders putting a pause on flights of migrants down to a notorious prison in El Salvador. The conservative justices in the majority ruled that each immigrant must instead file their own petition to stop their deportation and must do that wherever in the U.S. the administration sends them along the way. The minority justices said that allows the Trump administration to move migrants to places with conservative judges, namely Texas. The minority justices pointed to another case where the Trump administration has said that even if it does deport people in error, it can't get them back from El Salvador. Advocates in Colorado say a man here was disappeared to the prison in El Salvador without the opportunity to prove in court that he was not a TDA gang member. A review by CBS News found 75% of the deportees to El Salvador did not have a criminal record in the U.S. In another immigration case that has had plenty of due process, a truck driver involved in a terrible crash, a guy who's now headed for deportation, is going to leave this country with a lawsuit. Chris Vanderveen from our 9 News Investigates team looks at a very unusual scene that played out today inside the ICE detention facility in Aurora.
This all got going a little more than a week ago when ICE agents picked up the man, a Mexican citizen, just as he completed his sentence inside the Jefferson County Jail. The intention was clear. Deportation was imminent. But not until this last weekend did Attorney Sean Owen know just how imminent.
We had like 24 hours notice to get here.
On what might be Ignacio Cruz Mendoza's last full day in the U.S.
We're doing the Ignacio Cruz Mendoza, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Owen and a process server came to the ICE detention facility to serve Cruz Mendoza with a copy of a just-filed lawsuit.
We had to serve him here before he's deported, because once he's deported, he's beyond our jurisdiction.
The lawsuit says Cruz Mendoza didn't have insurance, didn't have a proper license, when the semi he was driving jackknifed on Highway 285 last June. The crash killed Scott Miller and left Annette Martin with a brain injury. The lawsuit also names the trucking company.
They didn't do any training. They didn't do any background check. They didn't make sure he had a license.
By the time he became a driver for Monique Trucking, based out of California, Cruz Mendoza had repeatedly left and returned to the U.S. 16 times by the latest count. Had he left this time without a lawsuit in hand...
Yeah, there would have been no justice in a civil court for my client.
Owen doesn't expect the lawsuit to deliver a big verdict to his client, but he says she wants the case to move forward nonetheless. Chris Vanderveen, 9 News.
At last check, prosecutors in Jefferson County are still exploring the possibility of charging the owner of the trucking company that hired Cruz Mendoza. That company has since been shut down by the U.S. Department of Transportation for operating what the government called an imminent hazard. Federal court in Denver is making history this week by not deporting an immigrant charged with crimes. Instead, that court is going to hear the case of a former Gambian military official accused of torturing Gambians on behalf of a dictator in West Africa. Human Rights Watch says it is only the third trial of its kind in American history. In 2019, Michael Correa was living under the radar as a day laborer in Denver. He was arrested by immigration agents and later charged with federal torture crimes. DOJ prosecutors say Correa was a member of a hit squad that tortured opponents of the Gambian president Yahya Jammeh back in 2006. Jammeh's government was overthrown while Correa was on a trip to the U.S. in 2016, so he just stayed here and eventually overstayed his visa. He's charged with 5 counts of torture, 1 count of conspiracy to commit torture, faces up to 20 years in prison for each charge. When Correa was first charged in 2020, the DOJ said it was trying to send a message that, quote, the U.S. will not be a safe haven for human rights violators. Human rights advocacy groups see this case as a test of what's known as universal jurisdiction that could open the doors for prosecuting other international war crimes accusations here. Democrats at the state capitol want future child custody proceedings to take into consideration if a parent opposes their child's gender identity. That's led to claims from Republicans that the government wants to take people's children. Our Angeline McCall breaks down what is actually in this bill and how close it is to becoming law.
At the Colorado Capitol, a fierce back and forth over trans rights and where they intersect with parental rights.
Standing up for civil rights is not compromisable. This is not protecting children, it's weaponizing the courts against parents.
Republican lawmakers argue House Bill 1312 says if a parent doesn't support their child's transition or gender identity, they could lose custody.
All this does is lay out very clearly that supporting a child's gender identity as a parent is in the best interest of the child.
Democratic Representative Rebecca Stewart is one of the bill's sponsors. She says the bill expands anti-discrimination protection for trans individuals. It says courts can't punish parents or revoke custody rights for allowing their child to receive gender-affirming health care. But it also allows a court to consider that dead naming or misgendering, for example, can be a form of coercive control and then taken into consideration when deciding custody disputes.
That may or may not ultimately play into a judge's decision. We are just making it very clear that this is something that may be considered.
Republican opponents argue parents who oppose a child's transition or gender identity will lose visitation or other rights.
This would allow a parent who may be navigating an incredibly complex and emotional issue with their child to lose custody for not affirming a gender identity they may not understand.
We are parents. We protect our children, and you keep coming up here and saying we overregulate and this and that, you're coming after our rights. And we're not going to stand for it.
Stewart, as the sponsor, says what they see on the ground is that parents who support their children are the ones attacked in court, but opponents fear the bill would be used differently in practice.
We did reach out to GOP members as well as the minority leader. No one was available for an interview today, but we'll see more discussion of this bill play out as it heads over to the Colorado Senate.
All right, Angeline McCall, thank you very much. Colorado's Democratic Secretary of State, Jenna Griswold, Democrat, is launching a campaign today for Attorney General. Her 7 years in office have been marked by some pretty prominent errors and bipartisan questions about her leadership from fellow elections officials. During her time overseeing Colorado's elections, Griswold's office has repeatedly sent voter registration mailers in the tens of thousands to non-citizens who cannot vote. During last year's elections, Griswold did not tell county elections clerks or the public that her office had inadvertently posted voting machine passwords online for months. The one password alone would not have been enough to get into voting systems and alter votes. Griswold has built a strong national profile and a fundraising machine off her opposition to President Trump and his policies, and she becomes the instant frontrunner in the Democratic primary for Attorney General next year. If the stock market had one of those life alerts, boy, it would have smashed that red button 3 days in a row after taking fall after fall. The man in charge of Colorado's investments keeps most of that $17 billion in safer stuff. But even he's not looking these days. Mark Salinger starts us off here with a challenge and possible opportunities as President Trump tanks the markets with his trade war.
For the person who manages the state's money, the view from inside the Capitol is clear.
President Trump's actions have ignited chaos and confusion across the globe.
Democrat Dave Young is the Colorado State Treasurer. His department invests more than $17 billion of state funds, purposefully doing so in some of the most conservative ways possible.
We prioritize safe and stable assets expected to endure market and economic stress.
While Colorado-based companies have lost tens of billions of dollars in value since President Trump's tariffs took effect, the state's investment portfolio is focused on long-term stability. Instead of investing state funds in individual stocks, Colorado invests in government and corporate bonds, mortgage-backed securities, and U.S. Treasury notes.
We specifically manage the portfolio to make sure that we can withstand these kinds of this kind of turbulence.
But that doesn't mean Young isn't concerned. If consumers stop spending money and tax revenue drops, the state could see an even larger budget shortfall than it's already facing. This year, it's already more than $1 billion.
Our tax revenues really depend on the economic vitality of our Colorado economy, and our Colorado economy depends, on the United States.
Some of this could lead to some major opportunities for places like Colorado, where I think capital investment will come in.
At the University of Denver, supply chain management professor Jack Buffington sees opportunity in uncertain times.
I believe that Colorado is going to become a future manufacturing hub for the United States, and the reason why is because of the airport.
Buffington sees Denver's massive airport and all the open land nearby as an asset to attract new manufacturing businesses, but he acknowledges that's a long way off. For now, the short-term pain, as the president calls it, will be felt everywhere from Colorado oil and gas stock values to the price of a can of beer.
I actually think that this is going to be a bigger shock to the supply chains than COVID.
For now, the state isn't touching its money, waiting to see what comes next.
There's been no realized losses. We aren't selling in a down market.
It's hard to put a number on total losses for the value of publicly traded companies in Colorado. Some reports put the number in the range of $40 billion lost in value in just the last couple of days. State's largest company, Palantir, actually gained in the stock market today after losing $9 billion of its market cap last week. That could be the gain today because of reports that it could soon be working with Doge to access and assess taxpayer data.
Trump giveth taxpayer value and taketh taxpayer value, or,
Get it where you can.
Company value away, I guess. All right, so Dave Young, treasurer, Democrat, he got into office 2019, so he was in there through the whole COVID drop.
Yeah, exactly. And they're looking back at what happened during the pandemic as almost a guide for how to go through difficult times. Obviously, there's differences, right? That was natural, or, it just came up out of the blue. This is self-inflicted. They're still looking at it and saying, okay, how did we get through these past couple of years during COVID, during the pandemic, and how can we make it through this time?
Mark Salinger, thank you very much. This week's Word of Thanks microgiving project, or last week's rather, is going to help bring comfort to a lot of grieving kids in Colorado, because you raised about $35,000 for Judy's House, the longtime nonprofit in our community that offers expert grief care for young people in Colorado at no cost to their families after the loss of a parent or a sibling. $35,000 raised for them. Your microgiving has raised $14.5 million for nonprofits around our state since 2020. I want to hear about the nonprofit projects in your community, big and small, how we might be able to help. I'll have conversations with these folks. Finances check out, leadership is strong and stable. There's a solid plan to use our donations for good. They may be featured here in the future. Email your ideas to us at next@9news.com, or you can text NEXT 303-871-1491. This quote-unquote containment issue at a Chevron well is causing problems for a small town in Weld County. A Coloradan's quest in Congress for remote voting for new mothers is killed off by Republican leadership, despite a number of Republicans in favor of it. And a new study tries to count up Colorado's homeless young people, estimating that thousands of kids are slipping through the cracks. That's next. One person's been hurt, about a dozen people evacuated after what they're calling a containment issue at a Chevron oil and gas well in Weld County. It's in Gailton, about 14 miles northeast of Greeley. Chevron says something happened around 6 o'clock last night that's causing the well to release water that contains oil and gas. The plume's not kicking up as high as it was last night. One of Chevron's workers was hurt and went to the hospital, and people living within half a mile of the site were evacuated. An elementary school nearby in the Eaton School District is closed today and tomorrow. Chevron says it has its folks on scene. They're monitoring the air quality nearby. They said they are not aware of public health impacts at this point.
If it's got to be Monday, this is not a bad way to go. Sunshine and mid-60s today. This week's weather pattern is a complete departure from the cold, wet, snowy pattern we endured all of last week. Blue skies, great visibility, light winds, and temperatures above the average of 61. 67 in Denver, almost 70 in southern Colorado. Winds are picking up in the foothills, but the wind will become a bigger story Tuesday into Wednesday ahead of a Pacific storm that's bringing high and mid-level clouds into western Colorado tonight. Those clouds will stick around, then they'll move back out. But even without as much sunshine tomorrow, it will actually be warmer, believe it or not. Temperatures trending comfortable over the next few hours, dropping into the 50s here after sunset. 7-day forecast includes sunshine with highs in the upper 60s and low 70s for Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. How about 80 on Friday? How about low to mid 80s, a possible record Saturday? Dry weather for Sunday and Monday, but changes the middle of next week. Yet another pattern change on the way.
Putting a number on Colorado's homeless youth is a difficult task. A new study suggests that schools are doing more than their fair share. Hey, a reminder, you can catch Next streaming each weeknight, 6 p.m. on 9 News Plus, and Next is now a podcast each weeknight, an audio version, wherever you find your podcasts. Not even an offhand endorsement from President Donald Trump could get a Colorado representative's efforts to expand proxy voting for new parents in Congress across the finish line. Democratic Congresswoman Brittany Pettersen has been fighting House leadership to modernize voting after the birth of her son when she had to miss some time. She said she's not at all satisfied by what she's calling a limited deal brokered by Republicans today. Pettersen had bipartisan support for the idea of allowing new moms and dads to vote by proxy for up to 12 weeks. President Trump said he thought it was a good idea, and when he said that last week, surprised some Republican leaders who insist that proxy voting is unconstitutional. Today, House leadership made a deal with Pettersen's main Republican ally, Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna from Florida. The deal does not allow for proxy voting. Instead, it just formalizes a pairing system that's already been used in Congress, where a member who wants to vote by proxy would have to find somebody with an opposing vote, and then they basically make a deal to not vote and cancel out each other's votes. Anyway, it's not proxy voting. In a statement today, Pettersen said the deal is, quote, not a win, and accused House leadership of going to great lengths to kill her popularly supported proposal in the House. New studies suggest that there is a pretty glaring issue with Colorado's homeless prevention efforts, that state systems have been undercounting the homeless population by potentially thousands of people. A team of researchers looked at data from multiple databases and estimated tens of thousands of homeless youth are falling through the cracks. The study comes from the anti-poverty think tank Center for Policy Research, in collaboration with researchers at CU and DU. They use what they call a multi-system approach to compare homeless youth numbers from schools, child welfare systems, and homeless shelters over a 5-year period. They looked at 2018 through 2022, and using that method, they estimated the count of homeless youth is 3 to 5 times higher than the official numbers. Researchers say the data sharing between systems is not great, and that half of those youth were identified as homeless in their school systems, but not identified as such elsewhere. That's especially true post-pandemic.
The education system at the state and the local levels have worked incredibly hard to strengthen their identification practices, thinking about ways to standardize at enrollment, what are young people's housing statuses, but part of that is because education has temporarily had more funds to do this, and that's falling off.
The study also estimates tens of thousands of homeless youth were not identified in any of the 3 systems. Researchers hope to expand their data set in the future, bringing in even more numbers from systems across the state. Marissa's here with feedback, which means we are back with that next. Thank you. Feedback tonight from Shirley, who writes in to say, my friend, who is a financial advisor, always says that when the market gets bumpy, quote, if you're on a plane and hit turbulence, you don't jump out. That feels like sound advice, so Shirley adds, I do plan to fasten my seatbelt, though. It occurred to me over the weekend that the market these days is a little bit like the DIA train announcement, where Alan Roach goes, hold on, please. And then you grab a strap or else you're going flying. A note tonight from Wayne, who writes in to say, you suck as an analyst, but you excel as a propagandist. See, that's thoughtful of Wayne. You put the compliment next to the criticism, and it's a lot easier to take.